Okay, today I'm going to talk about how to dynamically create URLs on the fly using formulas. So I'm going to demonstrate how to do this in Google Sheets, and then I'm going to show you how to do it in Excel. There's just one extra step in Excel, so it's just a little easier in Google Sheets, and then it's also a little easier to share this practice file with you. So I like to use this approach to dynamically create URLs to access in reports. I've used this with SEMRush, Google Analytics, BuzzSumo, lots of tools like that where a link to a report is made up of individual components, and those individual components we can use to our advantage. So I'm going to start with a simpler example using SEMrush, which is one of my favorite tools, and then we're going to get a little more complicated using Google Analytics. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I have a list of keywords, and if you're not familiar with SEMrush, you can do a search for a keyword, or you can do, in fact, I'll just start with SEMrush here. So you can search for a domain, a keyword, or a particular URL, so a landing page on your site. And if I search here for funky shoes, it's going to take me to this report that gives me lots of information about sites that are competing for funky shoes, all kinds of things. So let's say that I have a list of keywords relevant to my particular site, and I want to make it easy for someone where if they add more keywords to this list or change them or whatever, this link to the SEMrush report will update dynamically. So that's what we're going to do here. So the first thing we're going to do is look at this URL. So if we go in here, I'm just going to grab this URL and bring it here, and I'm just going to drop it here for us to kind of deconstruct. I'll double click here to auto expand the width of the column. So what you can see here is you have semrush.com/info, and then you have the keyword separated by a plus sign, and then this question mark, DB equals US. Because I'm in the United States, it's using the US database. But I could change that in SEMrush if I wanted to search the UK or Germany, France, or any of these other countries. I could also choose Bing if I didn't want to search Google. So I'm going to go ahead with that, and what we're going to do here is we're going to say, okay, well, the first part of the URL is going to be this part here up to info. So I'm going to go in here, and I'm first going to take this here, and I'm just going to drop this down here, and then I'm going to take off this funky shoes. And I'm just going to say here, this is just going to be a reminder for me, keyword separated by. Then here what we're going to do is we're going to start to pull together this URL. But the first thing we want to do is add the plus sign in between each of the words. So I'm going to come over here, and we're going to use this substitute function. So I'm just going to start to type it, and then as soon as it comes up, I'll hit the tab key. And the first parameter is asking what text do we want to search. That's this cell here. And then what do we want to search for? We want to search for a space. And then what do we want to replace it with? We want to replace it with a plus sign. So any place where we see a space, we're going to replace it with a plus sign. Now, if you have spaces after your keywords, then you can wrap all of this in a trim function, and that will trim off those spaces at the end. And now I'm just going to double click to send that down. Okay, and I call this a helper column because it's going to make it easier to create this formula over here if I'm referencing a helper column. I could do this all in one step, but it's really easy to get tangled up in your formula if you do that. Okay, so now what we need to do is pull together the raw link. So what we're going to do here is, because we have text in a cell, we could either put the text inside the formula, but then you have to use quotation marks, or we can reference a cell. If we reference a cell, then you don't need to use quotation marks. Now there is one thing that is hugely annoying with Google spreadsheets on the Mac, and that is I, for the life of me, cannot find a keyboard shortcut to lock down a cell reference. So this first part of the URL is in G4, so I actually have to type in the dollar signs. So this is just saying I want to reference G4 and I want to lock it vertically and horizontally, so it's only referencing that one cell. And then we're going to use the ampersand character to concatenate. So first we need that, then we need our keyword separated by a plus sign, so we're going to reference that here. And then finally we need this last part here, which is G6. So now what we can do is test this and see if it works. It's another thing I like about using Google Sheets is it's very easy to test. And you can see that it opened up the report for cool shoots, which is exactly what we want. So once we know that that's working, then we can double click to send it down. But now if you're working in a report, these can be really cumbersome. So typically what I'll do is I'll simplify this using the hyperlink function. And I'll just reference the URL and then the text that I want to use. So I might say, see report. And now if I double click to send that down, this is a lot easier to work with in a report than these long URLs, in my opinion. And then what I'll typically do is hide these columns here. You can do that by selecting them and choosing hide columns. Now one thing I want to show you before we do that is if this first column here could be extended. So let's say someone may add keywords or they might take some away, then you may want to wrap this formula here in an if function that basically says if this cell here is blank, then make this cell blank. If not, then use this formula, and that would look like this. So if this cell here equals blank, then insert a blank character, otherwise run this formula. Now in order to do this, we're also going to have to extend these formulas here. So we would need to take these and extend these as far as we think that they'll go. Now, normally I would go ahead and also insert if functions in here because this is going to populate with the first part of the SEMRush link. But since we're going to hide these helper columns, it won't really matter. So now if I come in here and I extend this all the way down, then these are going to be blank, but if I add something new, you'll see that it opens up the report for something new. And shockingly, not too many people search for that. Okay, so then we would just go in here and hide these. Now, if you wanted to get fancy here and impress your boss or client or whomever, then you could go in and take this formula here and insert it into this formula. And then that would just give you one longer formula. And the way I recommend doing that is wherever you see C4 referenced, just go in here, scoop this up. We'll just Command C, Control C on a PC. Go into this cell here, get rid of the equal sign, I shouldn't have grabbed that, and just drop in that formula. And now you'll see, even if I delete this, this URL works fine because now we've embedded that substitute function. So even if you ultimately do that, it's really good to have these helper columns, especially if you're kind of new to Excel formulas. Okay, so now that we have that behind us, we're going to get a whole lot fancier and dynamically generate Google Analytics reports. So you can use any number of reports in Google Analytics for this. In fact, arguably you could use any report in Google Analytics. except for a custom report. Whoever's going to have access to this sheet here is going to need access to that custom report. I'm going to demonstrate with the landing pages report because I really, really like this report. Plus, it has a little nuance to it that will be good to address. So the landing page report is one of my favorites because it just tells you the URLs that people are landing on and then what they're doing, if they're spending money when they land on that page or what. So it's one of my favorites. But now what we're going to do is we're going to click on one of these URLs because we want to dynamically generate a link to the individual landing page report based on the URL here. And so we're going to click through to a landing page report for a specific URL so we can kind of deconstruct this URL. Now, this URL is very, very long, so typically what I'll do is copy it and I'll bring it into Word and drop it. And I don't like to work with a live URL because it's a little harder. Anytime you click on it, it wants to go through to the actual URL. So what we want to do here is we want to look for the variable factors. And we actually have more than just the URL because in Google Analytics, you also choose the date range. So you can see here that I've allowed for that. We're actually going to create a start date and an end date. And you'll see how all of this works together. So the first thing we're going to do is look for the URL. So I pulled up the URL for my landing page, find text within Text Excel. If I look really closely, you can see here that starts with blog. So this is going to be the URL. And this %2, these are the forward slashes. So this is the part that's variable. That's my URL. We don't want to include the %3a, and this forward slash, it took me a little while to realize this, but this is extra. So we're going to have to account for this separately because this %2f is also a forward slash. So Google Analytics just adds an extra forward slash at the end of the URL. So this is variable, so I'm going to go ahead and highlight this in yellow. And now let's go ahead and look for the dates. So you can see in my report, I have September 1st, 2015 to September 30th. And you can see here, here's the September 1st. And here's the September 30th. So all of these elements here, these are all static. Anything that's not highlighted and anything that's highlighted, these are going to be your variable elements. So what we're going to do is take these individual elements and drop them in here in what I call the URL stitching. So we're going to drop this in here. That's going to be the first part. Then we're going to have the start date. So I'm actually, for right now, I'm just going to type in start date. And what I'm doing is I'm putting these in order so that way when I start concatenating them, it's really easy. All I have to do is just go down in order and I make sure I get everything. So next, we're going to have this little snippet here. So I'm going to copy and paste that here. And then I'm going to have the end date. So there's the end date. Then we have another little snippet here. I'll drop that in here. And then we're going to have the landing page. So I'll just type that in here. This / equals %2f. These are just little notes that help me keep everything straight because this can get super complicated super fast. So, and then finally, we're going to need that final /. Okay, so now that we have the individual components, let's start to build our start date and end date. So in Google Sheets, you actually have a data validation option if you go to data and then validation for date, which gives you a date picker. And I like to actually put in a little help message, double click to pick date. Now you'll notice when we double click on that cell, I get a date picker. And then I'm just going to copy and paste that in here. And you'll see the little help message here, double click to pick date. I still include instructions usually in here, or above it, double click to pick the date, because it's not terribly obvious. Or you can shade the cell and then have a legend, like maybe I could put like a light yellow shading on this and then a light yellow shading on a cell above it, urging people to pick a start and end date. So once we have this, then we can go ahead and pick September 1st and September 30th. I mean, we could pick any date we want, but we'll just go ahead and replicate that landing page report that I have up. But notice here, when we go back to here, this is the format of that particular date. So we can't have the date looking like this. So what we're going to use, first of all, here is a text function. So what the text function allows you to do is select the number that, or in this case, a date that you want to convert to text, and then tell Google Sheets how do you want it formatted. So we're going to select this cell here. I don't have to lock it down because I'm not going to be clicking and dragging it. And then the format that we need is year, 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 month, month, day, day. So here we're going to choose year, 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 year. We need lowercase y's, 2 uppercase m's for month, and then lowercase d for day. That's specific to Google Sheets. Oops, I made a mistake. We have to wrap this in quotation marks. Oops. There we go. And now we're going to do the same thing for the end date. So just to get more practiced, and because I did it wrong the first time, go in here, y, 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 m, m, d, d. Okay, now it's going to be in the format that we need. So the next thing we need to do, and I created lots of helper columns in this case, we need to fix the landing page. So you'll notice that in Google Analytics by default, it only includes the URI. It doesn't have the full URL, but typically when you're dropping URLs into a spreadsheet, you actually have the full URL that starts with HTTP or HTTPS. And so what we need to do is just pull this part out here. Now in my case, it's pretty simple because I only have one subdomain. However, I'm going to show you how to do this if you have multiple subdomains. So the first thing we're going to do here is we need to use the write function. So the write function allows us to scoop out the very end of some kind of string. So we're going to put in an equal sign. I'm going to start to type in write. And it's asking us what the string is. I'm just going to select L4 and the number of characters. So to get the number of characters, we have to use a combination of 2 functions here. One is the length function, which just tells you the total number of characters represented in this URL, minus the part of the URL that includes the protocol and the subdomain. So http://www.analytics.com, or if you had multiple subdomains, whatever your subdomain is. So we're going to figure out the length of this entire cell and subtract just this part here, and that's going to leave us with the URI. So let's start with figuring out the length. And we want the length of this cell here. And of course, we don't want to lock these down because when we drag these down, we want this to update. I could lock down the L, but I'm not going to be dragging these across, so it's not really essential. So we want the length of this minus however many characters are in this. Now, if you have separate subdomains, this is going to be a variable number of characters. In my case, it's the same number of characters, so I could actually just type in however many characters that is. But I'll show you how to do it in the event that yours is variable. So this is where we're going to use the search function, because what the search function does is you tell Excel or Google Sheets, this is the character that I want to search for, and we want this third forward slash here, because it's always going to be the third forward slash. We want to know the position of that character there, and then that's essentially what's going to be scooped out, but then we're going to have to add in one more character because we actually want that forward slash. But that's going to be a lot easier than identifying the M in analytics.com. So now we're going to type in search, and Google Sheets is asking us, what do we want to search for? Well, we want to search for a forward slash. And then where do we want to search for this? Well, we want to search for it in L4, so I'm just going to use my left arrow key. And where do we want to start? So this is in brackets, as you can see here, because it's optional. But in our case, we need it, because if we don't use it, it's going to start at this first forward slash here. But we actually need the third forward slash. So I always put in 9 when I'm working with URLs. And that's because if we count the characters here, the HTTP is 4 characters and the colon and the forward slashes are 3 characters. But if you have secure URLs, which I do have some secure URLs, there's going to be an S in there. So we want to start after that last forward slash. So, I mean, we have lots of characters to play with here. I could put in 10. I could safely put in 15 for most websites. But I just always put in 9 because I know that's going to start at this first or the second W, depending on if I have an S in the HTTP. So I'm just going to put in 9. And then if we just use this, you'll notice that we get it almost right, except we need one more character. We need that forward slash there. And so we're going to go in here, and we're just going to add +1. But there are lots of times where I haven't been able to figure out if I need to add a character or take away a character. So I'll just play with this until I get it right. But I know in this case, what I want to do is I want to say, take this whole URL and scoop out this part here, but then add in one more character because I need that forward slash. So we'll see if that works, and it does. So then we would just double click to send it down. And now we need to substitute these forward slashes with %2f. So we're going to do that using the substitute function again. And the text to search is this here. I could have used my left arrow just as well. And we want to search for a forward slash, and we want to replace it with %2f. And double click to send it down. Now we can start building the raw link. So this is just going to be a series of concatenation. So here you can see I want to start with this and then just work my way down. So I'm going to, I'm going to go back, select this cell here, F4 to lock it down, and then choose K5, F4 to lock that down. And in fact, I think it'll be easier, at least faster, just to type them in. K6, K7, K8, and then we need the landing page. So we're going to get that by selecting this cell here. Oops. And this cell here. And then I know that that last cell is K10. Oops, I have 2 of these. And let's click on this to see if it works. And it does. So now we'll double click to send that down. Just to be extra sure, I click on another one to make sure that it works as well. And it does. And now we'll do the same thing we did before using the hyperlink function, which also works in Excel. I'm just going to select this. and then double click to send that down. And let's select one of these to see if it works. We'll just click whatever. And it did work, so perfect. And finally, let's test our date picker to make sure that that works properly. So we'll go back here, and in fact, I'm going to go ahead and hide some of these columns. Basically, all of our helper columns. Because for your final product, you don't want those showing, but you don't want to delete them or everything's going to break. We'll also hide this one. Okay, now let's go here. Let's select June 1st to September 30th. In fact, let's update this. And now let's click on that last one that we had selected. And June 1st to October 2nd. So everything is copacetic. And there you go. I mean, you can use this for really any tool that generates a report URL. Now, if you want to do this in Excel, one small difference is over here in the date picker, you don't have a date picker in Excel. There are ways around it. There's actually a form control option on the PC for a date picker that you don't have on the Mac, but I'll link to a post on how to use that. On the Mac, I think there's an add-in that you can use to get a date picker. But in the absence of a date picker, someone could just enter the date. You just have to make sure that this is formatted as a date so that they know how to format it, so that if they put in a date, it will go ahead and format it the way you want it, whether it's, it looks like it's using this format right now. As long as this text function here updates correctly, you're fine. All right, so that's all there is to creating dynamic URLs in Excel or Google Sheets.